Good Wednesday evening to you folks. How are you? It is good to see you and it is good to be seen by you. I, of course, being glad about the doing and the seeing and the being and all that. And Bill Sylvie, aka the Dungeon Delver, coming to you live, loud and clear on a Wednesday evening. Now, I know that I had said to you guys, hey, Kyle's going to be back this week. Family stuff came up, guys. So we will hopefully be in the next week. He will be joining us then. But fear not, we've got a great show in store for you guys tonight. Before we jump into that, though, of course, let me just ask you a favor. If you're just stopping by for the first time, and if you haven't already done this, if you've done it already, it's fine. It's okay. If you would please click the subscribe button and click the bell icon for notifications to find out more about when we do these live streams, when I do the newsy videos, when we have guests, when we play games online, all that kind of stuff, because it happens right here every night, Monday to Friday, usually around 9 o'clock. I start earlier on Mondays. I've explained myself. I will take no questions about Mondays. But like I said, we have guests, we have live plays, there's pre recorded news segments that run sometimes during the course of the day. Hit that subscribe button and you will find out all about those, and I will really appreciate it. And also, if you're watching this video now or in the future, if you would, which that's the only times you can watch it. Anybody watching this video in the past, I want to see a comment from you. That's a pretty neat trick. But if you would please give this video a thumbs up, because the cost to you is exactly zero. 33K7, Ardu RPG, Robert Rabowski Turner, Gary Bova's Orbital Air, and of course, Tim is loose from the green room. We're going to have to collar him and bring him back there. I put out the Hennessy and pistachios. You'd think he'd be comfortable. But anyway, so welcome everybody, whether you're watching us over here or watching over on X. I appreciate you. I really do appreciate you 100%. So, tonight's guest, as you have probably guessed from looking at the title cards, buddy of mine. I'm very proud to say that. Tim Imholt reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to come on tonight, and I want to talk. Let's talk about Tom Clancy." And Tim is right there waiting to come in the studio with us. But I want to run this down real quick, and then I want Tim's input on how close I got this. It is not often that you find a genre defining, even creating author in your lifetime. And I can think of four just off the top of my head in genre fiction. Of course, the great Zane Grey. You had Hugo Gernsback effectively invented modern science fiction. And then that begat, of course, William Gibson, who invented cyberpunk, the genre of cyberpunk. And as early as the 1920s, we started to see the blossoming of the espionage genre. It may go back even further. But I think really it wasn't until I believe 1983, and Tim, you're going to have to correct me on that when you come in, if I've got it completely wrong, that the techno thriller was born. So what is the techno thriller, you might ask? Well, I mean, the simple answer would be just to say, well, it's a Tom Clancy novel, but it's more than that. And you might say, okay, well, the techno thriller, that's a kind of a spy novel. It is and it isn't. Now, I want to show you something. I actually brought these from the library not the public library, my library, to show you guys, because this. Let me see here when I hit the right button. This is Flight of the Intruder. It's by Stephen Kuntz. It is about the air war over Vietnam and a group of men who fight it and the dramas surrounding their lives. It is a techno thriller. This is a book we're going to be discussing tonight. This is my original copy of The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy, which, of course, spoiler alert, is about a Soviet sub-commander who wishes to defect to the United States and really put the screws to Mother Russia, and so he wants to do it in his top secret missile submarine. However, this, also by Tom Clancy and Larry Bond, is Red Storm Rising. It is also a techno thriller. This is about a hypothetical conventional war in the mid-1980s that breaks out in Europe between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. And last but not least, along those same lines, this is Team Yankee by Harold Coyle, and it focuses a bit less on the strategic and a bit more on the fighting man. So what is the common thread here? We have a book of historical fiction. We have ostensibly an espionage novel. And then we have two what-if modern-day stories. The techno thriller focuses not predominantly, but largely on the technology being used. Now, you might read a James Bond novel and say you're going back to a classic by Fleming, and he might describe the caliber of Bond's Walther PPK. But that's it. Full stop. If a bad guy shoots at Bond's car with a bazooka, we don't get a description much on the technical specifications of the bazooka. Clancy birthed the techno thriller by introducing you to the idea that the technology being used was just as important as the characters who were using it. So by the time you're done reading The Hunt for Red October, you'll know why submarines have a multi-inch thick layer of rubber coating on the outer hulls. You might know the average runtime of the Mark 45 acoustic homing torpedo, the range of the Cayman SH-2 Sea Sprite anti-submarine helicopter, and so on and etc. Clancy and then those who followed him dove deeply into the technological side of what their characters were doing and the technology they were using. So now that I've kind of given a primer, I want to welcome tonight's guest. He plays AD&D with us on Tuesday nights. He has his own website, his own YouTube channel here, rather. It's at Timothy Imholt. You can follow him over on Twitter at Timothy Imholt. Everybody, please welcome an all-around awesome dude, and I'm glad he's here tonight, Dr. Timothy Imholt. Tim.
Hello, how are you?
I am fine, my friend. How are you? So, did I get close to the bullseye?
Yeah, I mean, techno thriller is kind of like the technology is just as much a character as as Jack Ryan, right, or as
Right.
anybody else.
Yeah.
And I was almost going to take exception and say, oh, I think there was one that was a techno thriller that came a little bit sooner because Clancy used to love to say that it was military thrillers, not techno thrillers, and then he could point to Robert Ludlum and say he was first. But I think Clancy went overboard with the tech in ways that Robert Ludlum didn't. And
Yeah.
I was going to say Firefox predated it, but Firefox was actually 2 years later. So I had to look it up because
He
I
was-
didn't remember what it was. But.
He was really the father of the genre, and I mean there was a period in the 1990s, I think, when all of us of a certain age, like, man, we were just like little walking Jane's appendices. We could tell you the armor thickness of an Abrams tank, the flight time to target of a Hellfire missile, the transmission gear ratio in a T-72.
I mean, if you go down the list, right? If there was a time in the 80s where if you were on vacation in a waiting room at the mall, at an airport, there was somebody with a Tom Clancy book sitting there reading
Oh
it.
yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, they were everywhere.
Yep.
And I did this. The reason I wanted to talk about this a little bit more is because I did this tweet the other day on this book right here. And it went for like 300,000 impressions inside 36 hours.
Oh, yeah.
It just kind of went crazy. And I did a YouTube video on it. So if anybody's curious, this book was the important one that kind of sort of started his career. This was the first one he put out on For Red October. And for people that don't know, it was put out by Naval Institute Press. That is like never in the history of ever put out a fiction novel. But somehow they picked up this one. And it almost didn't get to get put out because it had all these kind of things in it that he figured out was like, ooh, here's this sonar system, here's this comm system, here's other. And Naval Institute Press, being Naval Institute Press, they sent it off to somebody that, you know, had stars on their uniform to go, hey, look, is there anything in here we should be concerned about? And there were a lot of calls going, who told him about this, right? What's going on here? Hold on a second, you know. So it spawned this whole rumor about, was he a CIA asset? Was he an agent? Was he getting information from somewhere? And as I hit my 50s, I'm like, I read all these things years ago, but I wanted to read them again, starting from the beginning of the story timeline, which is not the order they came out, but kind of the beginning of the story timeline all the way through to the end, to see if I could find hints of like, hey, look, it's been 40 years. Things have been declassified. We know stuff now, and we kind of know when it became public knowledge. You can kind of look up when it was declassified now and say, okay, was there really anything in there that he should not have known, that he shouldn't have been able to put together? So I've been kind of going through them from the beginning to say, look, you know, what went on. And I started with, I think, Bill, which is probably one of your favorites. It's at least a lot of people's favorites, Without Remorse.
That is, I would have to say that one. From a pure drama and literature, yes, literature standpoint of Clancy's book, Without Remorse is my favorite.
So it's the oldest in the storyline series, and if you've seen the movie on Netflix, they tried to cram a 600-page book into a 90-minute movie, and it doesn't work. And there's no way it was gonna work, sort of like a 10-part miniseries. Yeah. And then they tried to modernize it, which didn't work either. But you could probably modernize the story and get away with it. But you had to cut out so much of it that it just wasn't possible. So if you're not familiar with the story, or if anybody isn't, it's actually set during Vietnam. So it goes back that far. Mm-hmm. And it's the origin story of John Clark, which is he's in some of the movies played by different people. He's sort of that undercover field operative with no name that they send in to kill people when somebody needs to be killed.
Yes.
Because he's a former Navy SEAL and he's really good at that, right? So that's their guy.
He was played by Willem Dafoe in Clear and Present Danger.
Well, we'll get to Clear and Present Danger in a minute. That's one of my favorite. The scene where Harrison Ford just walks up and knocks on the drug dealer's front lawn and like, I'd like to speak to the drug lord, please.
Yeah.
I work for the CIA. I don't have an appointment. Will you let me in? Fantastic stuff. But it gets into that origin story, and I wanted to start there because, yeah, it went backwards and said, okay, you know, let's go look at Vietnam and John Clark, but it also lent itself to, we're going to talk a lot about the Navy SEALs, right? And the Navy SEALs weren't really well known. I mean, they were known, but their origin story wasn't as public as it is today. Right now, everybody knows it and it's out there. But in the 80s, it was not as well known. So yeah, I wanted to kind of start there to start to look for those little hints that he might have been getting information from somebody. And Without Remorse didn't really have any of those hints, but it was a great book. So I was like, okay, that didn't do much. And then one of the things I found interesting as I went forward throughout the series was the next one in timeline order was actually the third book he published, because he published Hunt for Red October, Red Storm Rising, which I have a first edition of around someplace that takes a forklift to carry. And then he wrote Patriot Games. Okay. And Patriot Games, again, is a movie with Harrison Ford. They changed a little bit up because it was real early in Jack Ryan's career. It was the first one that had Jack Ryan in it for real. And he showed up in oddly enough, he showed up in Without Remorse because his dad was in it as a police officer, and
Yep.
Kid Jack showed up, but it didn't count. The first one with Jack the Agent is Patriot Games, and great movie, but they shifted around to be kind of later in his career because they got Harrison Ford, and they're like, well, we can't make him a young Jack Ryan because it's Harrison Ford, but we got Harrison Ford, so let's alter a few things, right? And by the way, they got Sean Bean, and I'm going to shock everybody. Sean Bean dies in the movie,
Right.
because it's Sean Bean and it's what he does. But Patriot Games I found interesting because when I was rereading this one, I found a couple of pages that basically outlined Patriot Games. It was like, Jack Ryan, it gave a little bit of backstory of it, and it basically outlined the book that became Patriot Games. And it caught me thinking, I'm like, he had a plan. Either Tom Clancy had a plan or somebody was feeding him a plan to say, here's where Jack Ryan's going to go, right? Because he was not thinking one shot. He had this whole thing kind of scoped out in his head. So to me, it was kind of fun to sort of start to catch some of those notes as you go through them. And then when you go past Patriot Games, then you got Red Rabbit, which was actually written way towards the end of Tom Clancy's life, which is a story about the assassination attempt on the Pope that happened in the early 80s. So they took a real world event and he fictionalized it and said, oh, it was a Russian plot to shoot the Pope. And when you read it, you're kind of like, that actually could have been what happened. So you get put in the middle of it, and you're like, good Lord, that actually could have been a Russian plot. Does Tom Clancy really know something we don't?
Right.
So then this one, I got to this one, and I this is the power of social media. If you'll all let me go on for a second about the power that is social media if you use it correctly.
You have the talking stick, sir.
I do. Oh, I get to talk. See, when you give a PhD an open microphone and say go, you'd be shocked if there's no math on the end of this, right?
I was told there would be no math.
Nobody wants to do the math I do. It's not pretty. Anyway, so it when you get to this one, it went so crazy that one of the people that actually writes the current Tom Clancy novels reached out and was like, hey, if you really want to know how he was getting this information, reach out. I was like, oh shit. Somebody actually knows, right?
Now, I am going to let you talk, but I do want to just, I want to interject something here. There's kind of a popular hashtag that folks, you can look this up on social media. It's OSINT, open source intelligence. And we tend to live our lives, cards out these days. I say we, the broader societal we, that you can do stuff like, I saw this, there's a political rally and somebody did an OSINT map. Basically, they created a heat map based on the mobile phones of everyone who was in the rally and was like rambling off all these facts and where else they'd been and where they were from. And it was actually, it was kind of creepy. Nowadays, you've got Wikipedia, you've got generative AI, you have easy access to a ton of resources that today you could write something as quote unquote Now, I'm not saying someone could write it as well, but I'm saying someone could write something as quote unquote revolutionary as The Hunt for Red October, Red Storm Rising, Team Yankee, Flight of the Intruder, yada, yada, yada. Because we have OSINT. When Tom Clancy was writing The Hunt for Red October, if you wanted to know military stuff, you had to spend hundreds of dollars a month for a subscription to Jane's. Or you had to know people. So, Tim, I bounce the ball back to your square. What's going on here?
So he was an insurance salesman. Okay. Humorously, if you know the Jack Ryan story, and I found this part of the research kind of funny. So Tom Clancy was an insurance salesman because his wife's father made a lot of money in the insurance business, and he went to work for his father-in-law's company. Jack Ryan, the person in the book, Clancy was pretty open about, yeah, that's kind of how I see myself. And humorously, in the book, Jack Ryan and his father-in-law, who had a lot of money, didn't get along very well. And I'm like, was there something to that? And then you dig deeper, and it turns out his first wife was actually an eye surgeon, and in the book, Jack Ryan's wife is an eye surgeon. So if you kind of look at it, you're like, okay, he really was just putting himself down as the guy. But his insurance business was actually in between like Annapolis and Washington D.C. So he was surrounded by Navy people everywhere, right? So this was not a big stretch for him to know people. And if you know salespeople, they're pretty good at getting you to talk. And how many beers did he buy for people who happen to be on submarines just to kind of like bounce ideas off of, right? Nobody knows. And the answer I got was from somebody who actually talked to the naval intelligence officer who originally cleared this book to go out for publication. I did not speak to that naval intelligence officer who has now since passed away, but the person I was speaking to did. And they said, look, odds are, I think it's James, but the odds are, the way it sounded was this book, he got really lucky and just nailed it. Absolutely nailed it from open source information. And rereading it historically now, I look at that and say that's probably true. I'm former military and I've worked in the defense industry at a pretty high level. So I went and talked to some of my friends who were former naval intelligence, anti-terror groups and everything else. And the one thing that they said that really stood out that almost stopped it from being published was the communication gear. Because comms gear on a sub at that point was like the tightly held secret of tightly held secrets. Okay. So they let it go and they were kind of like, all right, he figured it out. If he can figure it out, somebody else can. Let it go. But then, of course, this book became huge. And this is where I think he started getting a lot of help. As somebody who's written books and who's somebody who my business partners funds things in Hollywood, this book came out in November 1984. Okay. By February 1985, he had a movie deal. Okay. Which means that was in the works before this came out. So if you research that a little bit, it turns out the movie deal was actually in the works even before this hit the shelves based on a preprint of the book, which never happens. Okay. So, I mean, just never. And then it comes out, the movie comes out in 1990, which for then that's lightning fast, with Sean Connery as the lead for a debut writer with the budget this thing had. It's nuts. A few months later, some reporter is mysteriously in Ronald Reagan's office on Air Force One, and there's this copy of Hunt for Red October just sitting on the desk. So shockingly, it just happens. One of the 5,000 copies. The first edition print run, by the way, was 5,000 copies. One of the first editions just happened to magically find its way onto Air Force One and have a picture taken by a photographer that could start asking the president, what is it? And of course, Reagan's like, I think he called it the perfect yarn or something.
Yes, he called it the perfect yarn.
Right.
Let me see. I'm looking. Let's see.
By the way, this is an actual first edition. One of those 5,000. I have two.
Let's see. I cannot remember if my copy, because I've seen the Reagan quote, and I cannot remember if my copy has the Reagan quote on it, but I have seen it. No, it does not. It's got a blurb from Clive Cussler, from the WAPO, from the Wall Street Journal, and that's it. Those are all the blurbs on it. But I have seen the Reagan quote about it.
Yeah, Oregon, I actually do have two. I had one. My father had one. My father passed away. I have two. It's just the way it works. But so anyway, this movie deal's done instantaneously. He gets half of Hollywood in it, a budget that's insane for a first-time writer. All these magical things just happen, right? Where he kind of is sort of the luckiest guy to ever walk the face of the earth. And one of the things that I think was interesting was after that, he, of course, had access to people at the intelligence agencies at the Navy. He knew everybody. He was everybody's friend. So what they would do is he'd make calls and go, hey, Admiral so-and-so, I'd like to ask somebody questions about this. And the admirals would handpick who he got to talk to and say, hey, Tom Clancy needs your help. Go talk to him. So was he getting classified information, or were they just kind of telling him what they wanted him to know? Right? And one of the ways you can control an asset is by restricting or sort of bounding what information they really have. Clancy is a creative guy. Okay, I know this. I'm going to go there. They kind of went where he wanted to, right? So was he an asset? Was he an agent? I don't know. But he was getting information, and they were kind of dictating what information he could actually get his hands on.
Now, to that, I was just going to say, to that, I actually have a friend, I had a friend who was a gaming buddy back in the mid-'90s who Clancy came on their ship, and he basically, he was... There were people with him, but they weren't stuck to him like glue. Mm-hmm. So when they came into CIC... They kind of stood back, and Clancy was just kind of and he got to Craig. If you're watching this, Craig Fish, hi, I hope you're well. So when they got to Craig's duty station, like out of the corner of the eye, he sees this guy. I mean, he knew Clancy was on the ship. Everybody knew Clancy was on the ship, but nobody said, "Hey, he's coming into CIC today." So Craig glances over, recognized him, and shut his display off. and Clancy's like, well, what does this do? And he says, "It's my duty station, sir." And he's like, well, what does it do? And he says, "Things." And Clancy was apparently like really offended. They were like, "Oh, we're sorry about that. Seaman Fish will discuss this with you later." And he was like, "That's absolutely fine." And when he left, he switched his display back on and went back to doing what he was supposed to be doing. And when he told me that story, I said, "So what was your workstation there? What did it do?" And Craig just looked at me and said, "Things."
Stuff.
But he would. Craig was not having it. It's like, it's great. It's wonderful. Hey, he's on the ship. This is potentially classified, and civilians probably shouldn't be looking at it. So I'm just going to turn the monitor off until he leaves. And that displeased Mr. Clancy by all.
I get it, man. He was one of those guys that, just sort of assumed he belonged in every room. But the other thing I noticed was when he wrote this book, it's a very well written book. And it's one of those books you can pick up and read in like a day and a half. You could just rifle right through it. Mm-hmm. After that book, he gets a little long-winded on occasion, right? He gets really detailed on certain pieces of hardware, which is why I think he was still getting information, because they were like, "Tell him we know how to do this," right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, let's go scare people. Yeah.
Now, I meant to bring it out here with me, but I think the last book by Tom Clancy that I bought, he did two or three straight up. You read this book, and it is a layperson's technical manual to operations. It's everything that you could be told. And the one that I have, because he did three, he did Air Wing, he did one called Boomer, and then he did one called Armored Cav. And I have Armored Cav. And the neat thing about them is they all have short stories in the back. None of them are Ryan verse, but they're very good. And Armored Cav was a pretty neat book. So if you like the technical greeblies, it was like no story, just, I met this guy, he's an M1 tank commander, I'm going to let him talk about his M1 tank, and then you would read this cool description of an M1 or a Bradley or an Apache helicopter or what have you.
Yeah, he had one called Submarine. He had a few others that were out there.
Submarine, that was the one I was thinking of.
All of which were really excellently done. And by the way, Submarine, I was in the Army when I read that one, and that was the one that made me go, I'm glad I did not join the Navy, because they were going to put me on submarines, and it didn't sound like a ton of fun to me. I always thought boats were supposed to float, man. These kind of purposely don't, and it just freaks me out. And I've got a friend who it's been on the Discovery Channel actually, dove the 5 deeps. He dove the 5 trenches around the world in his personally built submarine.
That's awesome. That's you go. Tell me how.
Yeah, I was like, dude, I'll watch the Discovery Channel show, but good for you.
I can do a GIS and look at all the pictures of the bottom of the Mariana Trenches I want, and I don't have to even get my feet wet.
He's a weird guy. He climbed Everest too, and I'm like, dude, good for you, because I'm not doing this shit.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll look at your pictures. But yeah, I looked at that and I read it and I'm like, I'm glad I didn't do it. And then I was talking to Victor about this, and he told me, he's like, yeah, well, on the boats, it's not that bad. It's like this, it's like this. I'm like, dude, you're all describing really bad things. It's just terrible. And when you get down to like those super deep ones, I'm like, this is even worse. It's like, not a chance I would do it. It's that they're crazy people that do this.
Well, look at it like this, Tim. If anything goes wrong, you won't have time to worry about it.
Exactly. It's like, done. But, this whole thing kind of makes you think, did we use, like, I started reading, so the next one that I picked up after Red October, the next one in the timeline, was actually written after he passed away. It was written by a guy named Mark Cameron. It's called Red Winter. It's that one. I'm about halfway through it. And it's about a fictional crash of an F-117 before we admitted an F-117 existed.
Ooh, okay. Neat.
And how much would East Germans, because East Germany was still a thing, right? How much would the communist version of Germany or Russia pay to get their hand on the radar absorbing material on that bird? Right. So, it's a whole espionage thing. That's a Jack Ryan book with the typical cast of characters, Jim Greer and others, to say, look, what happens if one of these goes down and people start trying to get that RAM. And the thing about that one I actually like is, other than the Tom Clancy books, it doesn't go deep in the technology, because F-117's 3 generations back now. I mean, it's ancient tech. Nobody cares.
They started designing this thing literally as the Vietnam War was ending. They're like, what if we could make a plane based on these Soviet research papers, which is, I think that's hilarious. America got stealth first because the Soviets didn't secure some research papers.
Exactly.
And we're like, wait a second.
But the book gets into this cool stuff where it's like, okay, we were operating out of Groom Lake, which is Area 51. Mm-hmm. And we're flying these things that look like triangles, right? And it doesn't look, if you've never seen one, it does not look like an airplane, like, especially if you're looking at it from underneath. Yeah. It doesn't look like anything's supposed to be up there. So at the time, I could see where you'd mistake it for a UFO. And the book gets into details like pilots that were selected didn't know what they were being transferred for. They were being told they were flying older, like F-4s or something. And they're like, F-4s? I'm an F-16 pilot. And then they get out there and go, oh my. Well, but you can't tell anybody, right? But
it's funny how they spread the systems out to familiarize pilots with it. It's in real life, like the A7, and I know you know this, Tim, but the A7 was a Vietnam War era ground attack jet based on the F-8 Crusader. If you see the thing, it looks like a basking shark with its mouth open. It is an ungainly looking jet. But when they started to develop the systems for the F-117, the various in-cockpit systems, they installed them in A7s and started training pilots on them. And they're like, yeah, this is some new gear we're going to be putting in ground attack aircraft. Without telling them, they were effectively being groomed to become F-117 pilots with this gear that was just stuffed in a common, ordinary ground attack jet. I thought that was pretty brilliant.
Yeah, and the way they describe it in the book, and I don't know if this is true or not, but they describe it in the book as, you get out there and, the ground crews are told, okay, now lay down, turn around, close your eyes, don't look at what's going to roll out of that hangar until it's gone. Right. So these things were so tightly held, they had to brief pilots, because if you've ever met you would know if you'd ever met a fighter pilot, because they will tell you in like 10 seconds that they were a fighter pilot. The dude could be like 85 years old and they will still tell you they were a fighter pilot within 10 seconds of meeting them. So they had to find pilots who wouldn't do that, which is not that easy to do amongst fighter guys. So each crew was unique, and there weren't many of them. And the book got into these fun details, like, and I didn't even think about this at the time. Every F-117 is a one-seat aircraft. So when you go up for a check ride, you're by yourself, right? It's like your first flight is not like with a bot guy who knows how to do this. So you're like,
it's not.
Okay, this is new. Let's hope it works.
I mean, it speaks volumes to the nature of that aircraft that Lockheed built two 4/5 scale trainer tech demonstrators called Have Blue. Both of them crashed, and they were both flown by expert Air Force pilots.
Yeah, without the computer system, this thing doesn't fly. Right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
They call it the Wobblin' Goblin.
Yeah, so it was this just tightly held secret, and the thing I loved about it is they got into such detail about Area 51 and how, this crash happened out there. And of course the UFO hunters run out there going, it's UFOs. Now the government comes to cover it up. I'm like, had this come out in the 80s, the UFO people that hang out and spread conspiracy theories all over the place about Area 51, they'd have eaten this shit alive.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I loved it. Now, 40 years later, you're like, okay, with 28 seasons of Ancient Aliens now, nobody cares. But
so how far into the weeds do you want to get on a little tech propeller head stuff about the F-117, Tim? Which I am sure you know, but I mean, you're my guest, and I don't want to get too sidetracked if we want to just keep talking Clancy.
I will give you the warning that I've actually worked on radar absorbing material, so there may be a line I have to stop talking at.
Oh, no. I just big picture stuff. So, but this is more for the viewers. So the F-117, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, of course, you knew, wait a minute, our planes go, they used to have the F-111 and the F-101 and the F-105 and all that, F-104 and all that jazz. But our planes now go F-4, F-8, F-7. Northrop had the F-5. You've got the F-18, F-14.
With the F-45 was released?
the F-47.
F-47s, all right.
So why F-117? Why was it kept as a Century series? At that time, the Russians kind of knew that we were stealing their planes. Like we would go to countries that were sort of aligned with the USSR, but sort of not, and just be like, hey, would you guys like some shiny new F-4 Phantoms for those rusty old MiG-23s? And it is a good deal. So we had our hands on an air wing sized force of Soviet fighter bombers, everything from like MiG-17s up to MiG-23s. We gave the Russians their MiG-25 back after Malenko defected, but they flew these at Groom Lake, and we didn't want the Soviets really to know that much about it, so they kept the Century series on those planes. I can't remember which planes were which, but they started with the F-112, 13, 14, and so on. The hope was that if the Soviets got their hands on a document and read something about the F-117, that we were just talking about one of their jets that we stole. So that was all I had.
No, that's actually not uncommon practice. So, like, remember John Clark? We talked about the Navy SEAL. Mm-hmm. There was a real life guy I did a video on the other day over on my channel named Richard Marcinko, who was a Navy SEAL who wrote a series of fiction books called Rogue Warrior. He's passed away now. He was the first commander of SEAL Team 6, and actually had met him a couple times when he was still alive. And one of the things that I found hilarious was, like, John Clark or John Kelly from the Jack Ryan books was his Navy SEAL, and we have Navy SEALs are well known today, but they weren't in Vietnam, and they weren't known at all really in Vietnam.
Right.
And right after that, up for a while actually. And at one point they started this group called SEAL Team 6. It's now very well known, right? And the reason they called it SEAL Team 6 is they wanted everybody who found out the designator to be like, holy crap, they've got 5 more of these. And really, there was like one other SEAL team at the time, so it was kind of like, let's just pick a number, throw that out. So sometimes the Army and Navy does things, and Marines, maybe not the Marines because they're too busy eating crayons. If you ever know a Marine, they'll laugh at that and probably tell you their favorite color. But sometimes they do things to try to throw the enemy off, and it may make no sense. And designators on airplanes are no exception to that. They just sometimes I think they randomly select them, but
Yeah, I mean the F-117 again. It says F. That thing's not fighting anything except gravity to stay in the air.
Well, they actually bring that up in the book, like because they mention it, like, oh, we have a fighter and like Jim Greer is like, it's not a fighter. The only thing that thing's fighting is stuff on the ground.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of funny. And what's hilarious is and it doesn't bring this up in the book, but one of the things I learned from a pilot who's on it is when they first saw it, the Air Force was like, great, but it needs a gun because it only had missiles and bombs. And the Lockheed was like, why? What do you need a gun for? We got missiles and bombs, and nobody can find you. This thing it's unclassified now. When you hear the word cross section, it means how big something appears. Mm-hmm. It's just for people that don't know. The radar cross section of the F-117 was the size of a hummingbird. Modern jets are smaller.
Yeah, the F-22 and F-35, it's like a B.
It's smaller. That's big. But so it had this like radar cross section that was just dinky, and Lockheed Martin was like, "We need a gun," or the Air Force was like, "We need a gun," and Lockheed Martin apparently went back to them and went, "When was the last time you guys shot anything down with a gun?" And the answer was, "We need a gun. We don't care." So, it has a gun. I'm not sure one's ever been fired, but it has one on it. What I find hilarious about that fighter is if you're old enough like Bill and I are to remember the Gulf War, and I found this out later on documentaries because I was in the 82nd at the time. If you watch that scene from Gulf War I where the bombing happens and there's flak going up and all this night vision stuff, all of a sudden power goes out all over the place, right? All over Baghdad. And then some reporter goes, I wonder if they're using stealth. I'm like, well, the air raid sirens went off 30 seconds after the bombs landed, so maybe.
Could be. But it gets passed over, but the F-117 actually first saw combat in Operation Just Cause in Panama.
Yeah. I don't think it really did much, but sure.
No, it did. It actually missed it. Well, so here's the thing. I think it was a psyop that they said it missed its target. Mm-hmm. Because it bombed it was supposed to bomb the National Defense Headquarters, and it bombed a vacant building next to. I think that was pretty much a very clear message to the Panamanians. You didn't see this coming. You didn't know this was about to happen. We just blew up a building next to you, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. Give up.
So I worked for people who don't know me, I worked in the defense industry for a while, and I am a physicist and PhD and whatever. I've worked at Lincoln Labs, Raytheon, the whole 9 yards. Even if you look at specs going back to the late 80s, early 90s, which are all declassified now, so there's no secrets here. During Gulf War I, we were putting 2 foot diameter bombs down 3 foot diameter chimneys. Our gear doesn't miss. I mean, our air assets, they don't miss. The Tomahawk, if you launch it from California and tell me which building you want to hit in New York, that's not good enough. You got to tell me which window you want it to fly through. I mean, we are that level accurate with our stuff. Yeah. And having personally worked on Patriot, Patriot is no longer an explosive warhead. It's kinetic kill, which means a missile that's the size of a coffee can doing Mach 5 differential with another missile has to bullseye it and hit it just dead on. So yeah, we don't miss.
Yeah.
with some of the smart weapons.
Most people's pictures of airstrikes, tactical or strategic, in the Vietnam War are, of course, B-52s emptying their guts over North Vietnam or over the battlefield in arc light strikes, or
Yeah.
it's F4s dropping 16 500-pound bombs with those snake eye fins that pop out and try to make the bombs more accurate. Not many people know this. Tim, I'm sure you do. Laser guided bombs first used during the Vietnam War. There was a very tough bridge called the Dragon's Jaw Bridge that the Air Force lost, and the Marines and the Navy lost a lot of planes trying to drop. And two F4s, one of them, the backseat guy, had a telephoto lens camera with a laser designator attached to it. The other F4, two 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs, cut the spans, dropped the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, you get a laser designator and a guy who's got it pointed on the right thing, you're not going to miss.
Yeah.
I mean, all the fighter pilots in the world can tell you, oh, we're so accurate. You're accurate because of the lasers, guys. I mean, I love y'all, but no.
Yeah. They're cheat mode, basically.
Please don't send fighter pilots to my house to yell at me. I don't.
So I have a question for you, Tim. Maybe this is something you can answer. Now, this is pertinent to the channel because there's probably some people out there who are like, man, you're not talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, it's just...
Bill lives, breathes, and eats Dungeons and Dragons, guys. Just if anybody
I
didn't
do. I do. It's all I got anymore. But anyway, so let me share the screen here, and of course I got to click 9 things.
There is a Hunt for Red October board game out there. Actually, it was a TSR game too.
Exactly, and that was my first question. So let's take a look and add this to stage. Here we are. This is that Red Storm or okay? So
that's Red Storm Rising.
Let me see if I can get.
And I did not learn this existed until yesterday. So I am ordering one from eBay. Actually, yesterday.
All right, so let me try this again. Share screen. I meant to share window. That's what I want to do. Okay, so here we go. This is the Hunt for Red October board game. Now, it was fairly well received. This was made by TSR in the mid-1980s. This is right after, or just when Gary left / was in the process of leaving. And this one, let's see if I can bring this up because we've already seen it. Spoiler alert. This is Red Storm Rising. Now, the interesting thing about these two board games is they mesh together. If you want to play Red Storm Rising and also fight the Battle of the Atlantic that occurs in the book, the rules for the Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising are compatible. You can use the advanced game rules for both board games and fight out the Navy battles as well as fight out the land battles in Red Storm Rising.
Well, now I need to order Red Storm Rising.
Now you got to get a copy of I'm sorry. You have to get a copy of Red Storm Rising. So what I wonder, Tim, and maybe you can lend a little bit of your knowledge on this, now we know Clancy was a war gamer because he and Larry Bond fought out the battles in the ocean for Red Storm Rising, which is ironic. They used they used Harpoon, which was Larry Bond's war game that's still published to this day. So they used Harpoon, and then TSR came and published a war game, which is probably a lot simpler. Do you know if Clancy got copies of Red Storm and Hunt for Red October from TSR?
Oh, I'm sure he did. The man was a pack rat. I mean, he actually bought his own tanks for his front lawn at one point. He bought World War II tanks and used them as lawn ornaments at his house. So,
Nice.
He, the guy's ego was as big as, politicians. Sorry, I don't want to talk politics at all. I swear.
Me either.
But he had this ego that was just massive, right? And so I'm sure he had copies of it because his name was on it. It's his stuff. He was a control freak. He probably had some kind of dictatorial sort of, hey, this is what's going to happen, right? And the only time he ever let go of control, and you can see this on he gave a bunch of talks at like the NSA and the CIA, and some of them are on YouTube, some of them aren't, but The ones that are out there, you can actually see him. I think it was might have been no, it wasn't Carson. It was probably Leno at that point. Carson. It was early Leno, late Carson when the movie started coming out. I don't remember which one was still on. Probably Leno. He was being asked questions like, wow, the movies are a lot different. Why do you do that? He's like, you should see the check. It's a big check. It's like, and then as soon as the movie comes out, I sell a lot more books, and then more checks show up. But so he would put his name on things, but my guess is that he had some creative control, at least a little bit, because even for Hunt for Red October, the movie, they had him on set quite a lot. They didn't necessarily listen to him, but they had him on set quite a lot. And he was pretty open, like, yeah, I wanted to come out here and see them do this, mostly because I'm a Sean Connery fan, and it's freaking Sean Connery.
Right. Well, that's interesting. The war game aspect of it, and like I said, it was kind of an interesting take because GDW was the publisher. They may still no GDW's not around anymore, but at the time GDW published Harpoon. And you could get air supremacy. Like if you wanted to play Harpoon, but also do fighter cover, it's like, okay, subs and ships attacking each other. Now it's not just going to be abstract carrier strikes. We're actually going to have individual planes flying around. So I find it kind of interesting that TSR kind of did an end run on GDW, the company that Larry Bond helped. I think he had some. Well, he wrote he wrote Harpoon, and here comes TSR with essentially a much simpler game for Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising.
And I've played Harpoon. It's pretty weird, but I used to play Avalon Hill war games with my dad, so I'm not prone to shy away from complex because some of those get weird. But Larry Bond by himself was an excellent writer, and his teaming up with Tom Clancy on Red Storm Rising, I think is what made that book so much better, because Clancy loves to get lost in the weeds, but I think Larry Bond's a better strategic thinker, sort of big level stuff, and I think that the two worked well together. I would have loved to see those two do 2 or 3 more collaborative projects, but
me too. We used to talk about that when I was in college, when the Clancy books were coming in faster and faster. We said, man, I hope he does another one with Larry Bond. But I've read Phoenix, which is a great Larry Bond book about North Korea kicking off a war with South Korea.
I've read that one, yeah.
That is a fine one, and I bought it at the bookstore on campus, and I remember thinking, man, when are he and Clancy teaming up again? Well, it turns out never. But I had heard, I don't know if there's any credence to this or I'm just misremembering something. I had heard that a couple of times they came to loggerheads over things because. So the story goes, I don't know how true this is Clancy had a beginning, middle, and end for Red Storm Rising. Like, this is how the plot's going to progress. And Larry Bond was like, yeah, but Tom, it doesn't work like that. The good guys do not win in the North Atlantic, and NATO's back basically gets broken. So if you want to actually show so I've heard that there was some disagreeable back and forth about story versus what the dice said.
I would bet that's probably true, because if you read Larry Bond stuff, he's much more realistic. But if you read Tom Clancy stuff, and I've read tons of them, but sequentially I'm on my 5th in a row, right? So, in Tom Clancy's world, the United States is always absolutely right. Everybody else is always absolutely wrong.
Yeah. We
can do no wrong. Everybody else can do no right. And somehow magically every character is always like really oddly rich in Tom Clancy books. It's like everybody's family has a horse farm somewhere, and we have whatever.
Despite the fact that this guy is like, and I don't necessarily even mean Ryan. I mean,
A fellow
here's a
FBI agent. Yeah.
yeah. Here's a U.S. Marine Corps sergeant. I'm sorry, you can make more as a department store manager in the 1980s than you could as a U.S. Marine Corps sergeant. But this guy tools up onto base in like, a cherry 78 Corvette. Like, come on.
Yeah, it's not gonna, or it's like there was part of one where Ed Foley, one of the FBI agents, was getting on a plane to come help Ryan with something, and a younger agent was there, and she's like, "Yeah, my family has a horse farm up in the Ozark." It's like, really? Come on.
Because of course, yeah. Clancy did get very, very very much like that. I mean, I think he was willing to get grit on people early on. Like I remember the young lieutenant in when the Soviets launched their attack on Keflavik in Red Storm Rising, he and a group of visiting Marines head out into the wilderness, and it's just them trying to survive on their own in the midst of the Soviet occupation. And he was a pretty down to earth character. You didn't get the vibe of, my family owns a horse farm back in Montana, like you did with almost every other character from there forward,
Yeah, but again, that was Larry Bond's influence, right? So it.
Yeah, it probably was. Like, Tom, you can actually have middle class people be in the military and government service.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody magically from a wealthy family all populates the entire military. Some people join because they need the college cash. And I've seen people on social media ripping people. Oh, what'd you join just for the college money? I'm like, I got news for you. A large part of the military joins just for the college money.
Yeah.
At least on the enlisted side. I was enlisted. So
there was, I'm not kidding you. Anyone who lived in the Orlando area in the late 1980s, you probably know what I'm talking about. On Kirkman Road, on the way to Valencia College, there was a billboard that had a picture. It was somebody in full riding leathers. They were on a performance bike. They were doing one of those impossible hairpin turns where the bike is like at 84 degrees, knee extended. And it had the then U.S. Army logo on it. And it said, sign up for college, sign up for a bonus and for college benefits. And then underneath that was like in the upper left, and in the lower right on the other side of the bike, it said, or, whatever. I'm not kidding. That was the billboard. Or, what? Like, join the Army, buy a motorcycle. That we don't care what you do with the money. Just do it.
Well, I mean, let me give you my take on it. Because I was enlisted in the Army. I started as an E3 because I was in ROTC in high school. But you live in the barracks. You have no bills, like none. Okay. Because your food is paid for. Your housing is paid for. Your clothing. Okay. You could buy civilian clothing, but you don't really need a lot of clothing. So you're making, $1,000, $1,100 a month, but you have zero bills, like none. Right. And you're 19, 20 years old. The first thing you do is go out and buy a car. And so you pull on base, you got all these brand new cars everywhere because people have no bills and they're like, I'm buying a car.
A buddy of mine served on boomers for a number of years around that time, and he had a beautiful, hideous Ford Thunderbird. You remember the 90s Thunderbirds?
I had one.
Yeah. So his car, 6 months out of the year, every year, sat in a parking lot at Norfolk.
Yep.
The outside of the car looked like something out of Mad Max. The inside of the car was as plush and clean and comfortable as could be, but the paint job was completely toast because it sat in the elements for 6 months out of every year.
Yeah, it was. That's another reason I would never want to be in the Navy, because they go out to sea and you're surrounded by guys for months at a time. And I like guys and all, but I was a teenager and I liked girls too. So
yeah.
Now that I'm in my 50s, sometimes I'm like, if I can get a vacation from the kids, I don't mind. No, I'm just kidding. No, I wouldn't do that to them. But anyway, back to Clancy. so he had all these sort of spy things, but his career kind of continued after that, right? So he bounced around in the Jack Ryan timeline, but he was always kind of one step ahead of what was going on in the world. So I went out and got another one of my first editions out, because I actually have pretty much all. Actually, yeah, I have all the original Tom Clancy's in first edition now. This one, remember this one, Bill? Whoops, Rainbow Six.
So that is just before that, I stopped reading Tom Clancy, because the two before that, Executive Decision and
Executive Orders.
Executive. There were like two that were back to back where Ryan becomes president,
Yeah.
and the last one, the paperback, was like 900 pages, and I was like, it is clear that you no longer think you need an editor. Get back to me when you're writing tight 300-page thrillers again. So.
It was Dead of Honor and Executive Orders. And yeah, I mean, Jack Ryan as the president was kind of hokey. And the other thing I will pick on him for, he's not here, so you can't argue with me. And I actually saw somebody ask him in an article or in an interview on YouTube, and he said, I'm Tom Clancy. I can do whatever I want. If you don't like it, write your own book. Which, as an author myself, I can appreciate that answer, because I've had people tell me, "Oh, you should write a book like this." I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds good. Go ahead, do it."
That's the civilian version of I'm the DM.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's how I wound up writing my first book. I was a subject matter expert for David Baldacci on Zero Day, because he reaches out to SMEs on a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was asking him, I was like, so what's your number one thing that annoys you about being a writer? And he's like, well, people come up to me and tell me you have these stories ideas that they want me to write. And I just tell them, go write it yourself. It's not that hard. I was a lawyer. I know how to, it's not difficult to go write your own book. So I wrote like 7 of them because they were stories I wanted to tell. But anyway, so yeah, he had this thing where he made Jack Ryan the president with his main character, right? And then he kind of, I think, took a couple years off because Executive Orders came out, and then you had Bear and the Dragon, which was just a 1,100-page monstrosity. And I'm a fan of his, so I can say that. And then he took a couple of years off and didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, I'm walking through a bookstore one day, and I see this one called Teeth of the Tiger, which is Jack Ryan Jr. And what I found funny about that was he made Jack Ryan Jr. like this international spy. The child of a former president does not get to go be a spy because they're number 4 on the kidnap this person list for everybody everywhere. Okay? Not to mention, let's say Chelsea Clinton, pick one. We know what she looks like. She doesn't fly in somewhere anonymously. It just doesn't work that way.
She looks like Webb Hubble, but that's all I'm going to say about that.
Sure. Bush's daughters, pick whoever you want. But
I'm sorry, Tim. I'm just teasing, man.
Obama's kids, right? We know what they look like, right? They show up someplace, they're not going to be undercover for long. So, yeah, it's exactly, Robert. It's like James Bond. Everybody knows who James Bond is. It's like, oh, it's James. He's going to sleep with your friend and steal everything. Get it.
It's again, you go back to the identity thing. So let's go back to Chelsea Clinton. She joins the government service. She becomes an NSA agent. Whatever. She goes into a foreign country. I am Tanya. I am here to buy the newspaper. Just a minute. You're a daughter of former American president Caesar. It's not going to work.
It's just not, right? So.
No.
It's kind of neat to read them because it gets you to get back in the Jack Ryan verse, but you have to completely disconnect your head from reality because it's not going to work in reality. And every other Tom Clancy book, you're like, that could really happen. So, including the one where it was Without Remorse, Dead of Honor. The one where the Jack Ryan becomes the president because during the Jack was the vice president for some weird reason that you have to read the book to find out. But during the State of the Union, somebody flew an airplane into the Capitol building and the Congress was gone, the Senate was gone, the president was gone. So Jack Ryan was the government, essentially.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like Jack decided to run for president. It was like they had a vacancy in the vice president and he was easy to get confirmed. So they slotted him. The next thing you know, he's like, I'm president? Really? What?
Yeah.
How? Who?
Clancy was rich enough, and his book sold well enough. He basically said, "You know what? I'm just going to reset the American government and do it the way I want to do it."
But airplanes flying into buildings, right? So he had the idea to do that, which was not a unique idea. It had been Japanese Zeros,
Right.
had done it before. But he had this idea of what would happen if you did a big one, right? And flew like a 747 into a massive building. Well, now you got a problem. And sure enough, on 9/11, we had a big problem. And he started asking. Apparently, he was asking around D.C. a couple times from different people. Hey, if somebody took over an airliner, do you guys have a way to take it down before it hits a building? And half of D.C. went, that would never happen. Nah, who cares? And
Yeah.
sure enough, he wrote a book, and it can happen, and it certainly did.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he did in his career that I think was sort of prescient in ways was he came up with Rainbow Six, which was sort of this anti-terror team, and it came out in 1998. So this is pre 9/11, where he said one of the biggest problems we're going to face over the next however long is terrorism. And here's this 900-page book that's actually really good, 700 and something pages. It's actually really good. That basically says, hey, look, sometimes to deal with terrorism, you're going to have to not necessarily work with the same rules you work with when you're dealing with a nation state. And out of that came a whole series of first-person shooter games and video games and all kinds of other stuff. But this one got me thinking. Rainbow Six is another reason I wanted to go on this little quest to go off and look at it. Who was chirping in his ear about terrorism? Because this is late 90s. And the rest of the world was being hit by terrorist attacks. We weren't really seeing it too much. It was happening overseas. But his warning book was like, hey, this is going to get bigger. So who chirped in his ear and said, hey, Tom, go look at terrorists? Right?
The only thing I can think is that he bought beers for people at SAIC, and that's all I'm going to say about that on my channel. That is literally the end of my discussion about that. I will talk to you about it in private, but
exactly. No, I've held clearances. I get it. Not to mention, we don't want YouTube to take us down. YouTube, we're conjecturing here. We don't know anything, I promise you.
It's role-playing games. This is all role-playing games. We have D20s and D10s and everything else.
Yeah, you're right, Robert. We had the Oklahoma City bombing. That was domestic. And we did have the World Trade Center attempt, which was bin Laden before he was bin Laden, right?
Yeah.
Took a wimpy attempt at it.
Party Ground Zero says Clancy was a DC bartender. I mean,
I got to tell you a secret here. Okay, it's not really a big secret. Clancy, at that point in his career, I mean, just after Patriot Games, right? Multi-millionaire at that point, right? So he could have lived anywhere he wanted. So he bought a really nice place. When you live in really nice neighborhoods, and I live in one, you got multi-million-dollar homes. There's a lot of cocktail parties that go on. So, you can find stuff out.
Yeah.
If you know the right person and you live in the same neighborhood with them, or you know the guy that lives in the neighborhood with him, you can find out. It's not that the world is not that big. Most people do not realize you're probably not more than 4 or 5 phone calls away from anybody you want to talk to anywhere.
Yeah,
you just got to know which chain to go through.
I mean, I love telling this story, and this makes everyone, including you, Tim, 4 steps removed away. But I am 3 steps removed from H.P. Lovecraft. Gary knew Fritz Lieber. Fritz Lieber was friends with H.P. Lovecraft. I was friends with Gary. You guys know me, Tim. You know me, so there you go. You're 4 steps removed from H.P. Lovecraft.
Hey, I'm not sure I'd want to talk to him. He would scare me, but something about the Cthulhu thing. I don't.
Something about the Cthulhu thing.
Just a little bit creepy. But it's like I know people that have Trump's cell number. If you want to talk to him, I'm not happy about that. Oddly, he'd probably answer it.
I am reminded of a little bit of OSINT, a high school newspaper reporter. looked at a public photo of James Mattis and realized that when they took the photo of him, he was holding a like a clipboard, and he flipped the picture upside down and realized that there was a phone number written in marker on the top sheet of paper, and he called it, and it was Mattis's cell phone number. And he ended up interviewing Jim Mattis, and
So-
he was super nice about it. He wasn't like, how did you get this? How dare you? I'll peel you like a potato, kid. No, he chatted him up. And
Oddly enough, I actually know General Mattis. I met him when he was CENTCOM commander. He used to come to MIT, and when he would come in for briefings from what he called the AK Brigade, he found out I was ex-Army when he was there one day, and he's like, "Get that guy that speaks my language." Right. So I wound up there like translating, scientist to Mattis a couple of times.
scientist to Mattis.
Well, I mean, you get these guys that are like, I worked at MIT, right? So you get these guys that are Nobel laureates up there giving a talk to a guy who's a Marine Corps general. And he's a smart guy. He's not a stupid guy at all. But, it's a different language, right? So he's like, put it like you tell it to him. He'd look at me and go, "Can you translate that to Marine?" I'm like, "Yes, sir, I can." And I would translate it to Marine. But after it was kind of funny that you bring him up, because when the 2020 election rolled around, I was actually emailing him like, "Sir, you have to run for president. I don't even care what party you are, because I don't even know. I'm like, you have to run for president." He's like, "Why?" It's like, "Your nickname is Mad Dog. It's the 2020 election. Come on, we got to do this." Mad Dog 2020. How many times can you have that in an election cycle? But that dude is crazy. And that's one of the things that in the Marine books that Clancy wrote, he gets absolutely right. Marines are a special group, and I will forever love them. As an Army guy, I will have the greatest respect for them. They're a little different. And I can sum it up. When Mattis was a 3-star, I was given this briefing, and we had this break for lunch. Everybody's out grabbing a sandwich off the tray or off the table and going back in the conference room. And I asked him, I was like, "General Mattis, every time you come to campus, you've got this like knife in your belt that's like goes against the uniform." He's got this like pocket knife hanging off his belt. Mm-hmm. He's like, "First off, I'm a general. Nobody's gonna argue with me." I was like, "That's true." He's like, "You were enlisted. You ever think I'd come back in as an officer?" I was like, "No, sir." He goes, "Don't, because it sucks." I was like, "Okay, that's true." He's like, "Third, the knife is there because you never know when you got to cut a piece of cheesecake or stab somebody in the neck." And I'm like, "Okay."
There you go.
Absolutely. That's a Marine. That's a 3-star general Marine. And the one other thing I know about him that I had to call and confirm was he gave this commencement address at the Naval Academy. And apparently right before the Naval Academy, the commencement address, the commandant comes up to him and goes, "Sir, can I see your speech?" Because Mattis was infamous for stories that you don't really want to tell in front of families.
Sure.
So Mattis, the commandant goes, "Can I see your speech?" And Mattis like, "What the heck, man? You asked me to come do this?" He's like, "All right, here, shit." And the commandant looks at it and it's like, we wanted you to like tell the secret of your career, not like, "Oh, this is like great, but it's not Mattis. It's other things." He'd written a very formal speech. So he's like, he had 15 minutes. He's like, "All right, I'll go wing it." He's like, he gave one of the shortest commencement addresses ever. He told the story of how he took the surrender after the Second Gulf War. He drove behind enemy lines with a lieutenant in a Humvee, and basically said, "I'm here to take your surrender." They're like, "Oh, we have your commander. We have their commander. Why would you surrender?" He's like, "If you don't, you're going to piss off a whole bunch of Marines. They're going to come in here and kill you." Yeah. And it's like, there's airplanes flying around. I got artillery shells. I'll die today. I don't care. You take your pick. And apparently they surrendered almost instantaneously. So he told that story at the thing. And then he goes, "And they want me to come out and tell you the secret of my career. And it's pretty simple. The secret is you're going to have 2 plans when you walk in any room. You're either going to drink a cup of tea or you're going to kill everybody there. You let everybody else in the room decide which one happens."
Yeah. I am his. Somebody quoted him at the official, like, when a major, basically the Army and the Marines were demanding the surrender of a huge chunk of the Iraqi army, and he said, Gentlemen, I didn't come here with tanks today. I sent my artillery home. But I promise you, and I say this with tears in my eyes, if you fire one more shot, we will kill every one of you.
Yeah, it's something like that. He's that guy.
Yeah.
So anything you see Clancy write about Marines is probably not extreme enough.
I will tell you my one personal encounter with a Marine, and he wasn't even a Marine yet, but he became a Marine, and it fit. My sister was dating a young man in high school. I say young man now. I was 10 at the time. We all went to the park. That is, my mother sent me to spy on them at the park.
Of course, that's what mom did.
He was a tabletop gamer, and he had brought like he had some Steve Jackson Pocket games and some other stuff that I thought was just awesome because I was just getting into D&D at the time. And so I thought he was pretty all right. So I wasn't really paying attention to them making googie eyes at each other on the bench in the park there. I'm climbing up on top of the monkey bars. And as I'm doing so, I hear whang! And I look around, and then I hear whiz whang as a rock barely misses me and clatters into the monkey bars. And I look over, and there's Justin throwing rocks at me. And I yelled, "Why are you throwing rocks at me, you asshole?" And he said, "'Cause you're up there."
That's a Marine for you. That's like...
And yes, he went on to become a Marine. The next time we saw him, he came back from basic and was in his Gomer piles. And
there's most Marines will tell you if you want something broken or pregnant, call them. If not, call somebody else. Yes. Anyway, so back to Clancy.
Back to Clancy.
So the other reason I wanted to kind of dig into this whole Tom Clancy-ish thing was, I see a lot of authors, a lot of publishers now are continuing in an author's name, like Robert Ludlum is having books written by authors who in and of themselves are excellent writers, but they're writing under Robert Ludlum's name and voice. And now Tom Clancy is kind of coming out much more frequently. And I don't think maybe it's just a money grab. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But
I have an opinion about that, but I'll get back to it in a minute. Continue, please.
So, but one of the things I find interesting about it, especially after reading Red Winter, because I'd read, before I started this quest, I had read absolutely zero of the Tom Clancy books that came out after he passed away. I'll be completely honest about that. Until yesterday, I had not picked one up. And now I'm halfway through one because it's actually really good. My thought was, if Tom Clancy was really a good tool for the agencies to use while he was alive, perhaps that exercise could be continuing with new writers. So I kind of wanted to dig into this through the Tom Clancy years and beyond to say, hey, look, are we just trying to find a new way for intel agencies to like get some stuff out there that might help them with something other? Because if you remember in the 80s and 90s, there were two things that were invaluable to recruiters for the Navy and the Air Force. And that was Top Gun and any Tom Clancy book ever was just gold to recruiters, especially for the Navy.
I remember before The Hunt for Red October came out, I read in the Orlando Sentinel the Navy hoped that The Hunt for Red October, the film, would do for the submarine service what Top Gun had done for Navy Air in terms of recruitment.
Yeah, and it did. And if you didn't make it for the Navy, the recruiters in every town are all right next to each other, so you get sent around to different places. And I talked to everybody when I was thinking about joining, and the Navy wanted to put me on submarines, and I'm like, no, we're good. We're going to go over someplace else. Because I did not want to. They were going to make me a nuclear technician, and I did not want to be on boats that purposely sink. Just not my idea of a good time.
It's like airborne. Why would I leave a perfectly good plane?
I was airborne, and I can tell you the answer to that. I will introduce you to some Army mechanics, and you'd want to know how to jump out too. You'd be like, I got to know how to get out just in case it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. But yeah, Yeah, no one of consequence. I think I remember that too. I remember seeing it in theater because it came out the year I graduated high school. Year after I graduated high school. Sorry, and I remember seeing it in theaters where they were set up all over the place. It was not. They were overt about it, right? But his books and things did great for it. And if you look now, we're not having as easy a time with recruiting, where people are kind of down, not down on military members, we're down on military actions, I think, because of the protracted, very long war on terror. I think as a country, we're kind of like, we don't really want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So I had this theory that maybe these books are coming back out again to kind of remind us that this is actually necessary from time to time. And having a ready to fight military is actually a worthwhile thing to go do. Because I think people like veterans, and I think in general, we talk about it. And as a veteran, one thing I can tell you is when I talk to people, everybody's very happy, very gracious. Thank you for your service. People are very happy. They'll, especially on Veterans Day, I don't really ever buy a drink. But I think politicians use veterans for photo ops more often than they should. But I think the military itself is having challenges with recruiting because of the war on terror and traumatic brain injuries and a lot of other stuff that occurred. And I had this theory that maybe the Tom Clancy books are becoming kind of overt again to see if maybe that can help recruiting a bit. So I wanted to read those newer ones to say, look, how are they? Are they really good? Are they not good? And it was interesting to talk to somebody who I actually had a chance to trade emails with yesterday. I was supposed to talk to him again. With somebody who is writing the newer ones, one of the authors actively working on it. Are we just trying to relive the glory days of the Cold War? Are we trying to get into other stuff? And if you look at the years the other ones are set in, they're actually post-Cold War, so we're talking modern stuff. But what's the reading demographics look like? Right? Is it me and you, Bill? Because we're in our 50s. I'm not joining the Army again. That's never going to happen. You donate my body to science fiction at this point. Was that one comedian, the really old guy, comes out and goes, they told me I didn't have arthritis. They told me I had pre-rigor mortis. But is that what's going on? Are we trying to boost recruiting? Are we trying to boost the morale of the military? Are we trying to boost public sentiment? I don't know. But I wanted to kind of go through them and try to pick that apart a little bit. So it's fun to go through it as a scientist and pull these things apart and look at them. And what else am I going to do with my time? So,
well, definitely let me know what the result of your findings are there. I would be fascinated.
He was absolutely a tool, man. It's just not in a bad way. It was a tool for the government in ways.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I can tell you, and I love telling the story. My dad and I went the night it premiered because I was hyped for it. I had read it. He had read it. When I got these two, we bought these. Tim, do you remember the book and VHS tape? Pyramids, cubicles, ziggurats in Costco. Like you'd go in and they'd have 3 action movies shrink wrapped together. That's where I got my VHS copy of Die Hard and Predator and I think there was one other, maybe it was Red Dawn or something like that, all shrink wrapped together. Mm-hmm. Well, that was how I got Red Storm and Hunt for Red October. They came shrink wrapped together right there in the pyramid. And as soon as I finished these, Dad read them, and we were excited about going to see. Hunt for Red October, and we went down. We used to have the largest naval training center in the United States here in Orlando. Just a few miles from the ocean, and then Brack said, "Hey, let's close that one and open one in the Midwest instead."
What the hell is that all about?
Anyway. So yeah, they closed the Navy base that was 30 miles from the sea and left the one in Detroit open because that's where you go to the ocean. I don't know.
They needed votes from that congressional district.
Yes, that is exactly what Brack did. I'm just going to say it. This is the one politics thing you'll get from me ever on this channel. Florida was still firmly red at that time, and the Clinton administration decided which bases would open and which bases would stay open.
Just the way it works, man.
Anyway, but we went to see the Hunt for Red October 3 or 4 years before the Navy base closed, and the theater we got into was on that side of town. Tim, our seats were in the front, like 2 rows back, all the way on the left. We watched the movie like this.
Yeah,
because
it was
every other seat, wall to wall, front to back, Navy guys, you would have thought it was a rock concert the way they screamed and yelled and stomped their feet at the appropriate moments in that movie. Those white hats loved that damn film, dude.
It was even Army guys when they went to see it. It was just silence throughout the theater. Nobody wanted to watch. From that opening sequence where they put that up on the screen, it's like, according to our government, none of this ever happened. Yeah. We're all like, dude. Yeah. Like we're just like locked in, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that was 2 hours well spent. I think. By the way, I don't know if any folks out there have this. Hunt for Red October is free this month on YouTube Premium. If you've never seen it and you have YouTube Premium, you have no excuse. Go watch the Hunt for Red October.
Yeah, it is out there. It's pretty easy to find. I was actually kind of joking around. I ran this poll on my Twitter account on the best submarine movie ever made, and people got mad at me because I gave 2 options: Hunt for Red October and Crimson Tide, and apparently I left off Das Boot. So I'm rerunning it today with Hunt for Red October up against, because it won, up against Das Boot, and so far Hunt for Red October is winning again, 62-38.
Dude, Red October is the gold standard of submarine. Now,
I would argue there's one that's close. Down Periscope.
Okay, fair enough. Down Periscope. Kelsey Grammer, we gotta give it to Kelsey. But no, I mean, Das Boot is an incredible movie, but it suffers
so long
from being 250 minutes long, and
so long.
That's a mini series. That is literally like an 8-hour mini series chopped down, and it suffers from that editing, and it suffers from still being 4 hours long.
Yeah, it's like it just was so long. It's a great book, right? It's an awesome book. If you've ever read it. But as a movie, I'm like, I get it and watch it once, but Hunt for Red October, you can watch over and over and over again, and it still kind of works. Yeah. Just something about listening to Sean Connery going, remember, Ryan, some things in here do not react well to bullets. It's like, only Sean Connery could pull off being a Russian sub-commander with a Scottish accent and have us all be like, we don't care, it's Sean Connery.
We will conduct our missile drills and listen to that rock and roll music.
Exactly. And you're right, U-571, another great sub movie. I would actually put that in probably my number 3 or 4 slot. Because Hunt for Red October is absolutely, I think, my number 1. Crimson Tide, as some people would argue, it's not a submarine movie. It's a dramatic film, happens to be set on a submarine. I'm going to call it a sub movie because there's water. But Gene Hackman and Denzel, I mean, it's tough to beat those two together. But any movie Baldwin does to get a gun ends. I am not commenting on this for fear I'll be subpoenaed in an upcoming action film. But yeah, to me it's those two are my top 2 in the submarine world, because there were a bunch of sub movies that came out for a while there, and honestly, back to Clancy, there's all these new series on Amazon Prime, and there's a new movie that Amazon's putting out with the same actor. And the Jack Ryan stuff, and they've done well. They've been pretty entertaining. It was kind of modernized, to put it in sort of modern day. And by the way, if you've seen that, you're like, oh, it's not Jack Ryan. Think of it as Jack Ryan Jr. and it helps. It really does make it easier to tolerate. I don't know why they kept Greer if they were going to do this, but let's let that part go.
So Tim, I'm going to dark horse you on something real quick though. Submarine movies, Ice Station Zebra.
Oh God, I haven't seen that in years.
That is a
Um,
fine submarine movie.
well, we could throw Sphere into that thing too if you really want to kind of go that way. But
Yeah, no, no. See, Ice Station Zebra, though. I mean, that's a thriller. That's a Cold War thriller. Sphere is a sci-fi movie. I mean, we're
yeah,
just talking
well,
about
it's
Cold
Michael
War
Crichton
thrillers.
instead of Michael
Yeah,
Crichton's not really known for anything other than that.
yeah.
Well, and dinosaurs. Uh, which, by
Anyway,
the
so
way, I will disclose this information just because I will. I actually know people who are investors in the company that's trying to breed dinosaurs, and I pick on them relentlessly for this. It's like,
you
dude,
know,
we've seen the movie. It's
uh,
like,
hey, I've got Tim. I've got an account for 11 Lambs. Do you want me to dial up some John Hammond and recordings you can spam their voicemails with?
oh no, I spam them quite often. It's okay. It's like it's like I send them clips of it. Just yeah, I send them little memes like, dude, we've seen it before. Do we know how it ends? It ends with the screaming and the yelling and
Yeah. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think, well, if they should.
exactly. So yeah, I pick on them for this. But since every one of them is a lot richer than I am, they're like, well, yeah, because we can. I'm like, okay, just remember, just remember, don't call me looking for help if this goes wrong. Just because I used to work in nuclear physics doesn't mean I'm going to bomb dinosaurs for you.
I was talking to somebody about this to get back to Clancy. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and we both agreed. We both agreed that the Hunt for Red October was the last of the 1960s style epic Cold War thrillers with a cast of dozens. There is literally nobody on screen in the Hunt for Red October where you're like, I think I remember him from being in the background of like one of the one of the Dirty Harry movies. Everybody is a smash blockbuster actor in that. It
Yeah,
is
I mean,
it is talent from beginning to end.
the only people that aren't, and I found this out while I was researching, um, actually this book when I kind of first started this quest. I've gone on this, so I partially retired for anybody who doesn't know, and I started looking for stuff to do because my kids were like, "Dad, are you going to leave us alone?" Or anyway. So I started researching Hunt for Red October, the movie, and how it was made and put together, and all that. There's a lot of this that's out there. It's not hard to find. Uh, they got frontline actors. Basically, they got Sean Connery hooked on this thing because he used to be in the Navy, the Royal Navy, but he was in the Navy. So he wanted to do it because of that. He's like, I'd really like to do this because of my connection with it. And when you're Sean Connery and you start calling friends, right, you get anybody you want. And he got a ton of people to just come in for less than what they would have gotten paid in other cases to do this film. And for the background actors that are actually background for the scenes where you see these Russians go through or you see Americans go through, they used actual Navy people who had that job code. Who's
Yes.
like, we're just running a drill, right? This is, and everybody's, if you've been in the military, you've run every drill for your job code like 90 times. And so they weren't acting. They were just like, another drill. Okay, cool. Just we have cameras this time. Yeah.
Someone said to me on X because I was talking about this that their friend, yeah, my buddy has like 3 lines, and they were like, okay, we want you to do this, and he was like, oh sure, and we're gonna pay you this. Wow, that's really cool. Thank you. And we need you to fill out this paperwork. Here's your SAG card. You're now part of the Screen Actors Guild. To say lines on screen, he had to be a SAG member, so he had to sign up to be a SAG member right then, right there, to have any dialogue in the movie. So he did it, and that's his friend's claim to fame.
I would have signed that in 2 seconds.
Oh, without a doubt. Without it.
Like,
I just been like, do you need blood? If you don't have a pen, I'll bite my finger.
it's like, you want me to come on a show and play a goofy scientist who reads too much? I'm happy to do that. I'll sign anything.
Yeah.
I'll do it for SAG minimum wage.
Yeah, right. And isn't that nice about being on my live streams? I for the D&D game, I don't make you guys sign SAG waivers.
We don't even have to sign a non-disc. We don't have to sign anything, man.
That's right. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about my show elsewhere. But anyway,
of course, it might be if you talk about things Bill doesn't like, he kills your character, and then you have to roll up a new one. But that's beside the point. I am telling you, you kill off another character, I'm rolling one up and naming him Show Enough.
I will do my best to keep Elminar alive, Tim. I already got a romper room student with Tonka Todd having joined the game. So. That guy.
So
love you, Todd.
Back to Tom Clancy. As I'm reading through these, it hit me, and I actually know people in the industry, and my typical business partner actually does fund some movies and streaming series. One of the things I actually kind of want to do, because the Tom Clancy family still owns, pretty much everything, especially the name, right? They've leased some of it out to Netflix or Amazon Prime, whoever's doing the streaming series. But they still have enough control they could do other stuff. And it hit me that I'm like, there is so much source material here that there have been. He is the meanest, Amy. He's also the prettiest. I've seen that movie so many times I can't even. It's got vanity. What else do you need? But there's so much source material there that we have all these World War II movies that are based on sort of real events, and a lot of the World War II stuff is now so fictionalized that it's no longer really kind of based on real events, because we've told the story, we've got the documentaries. Now, hey, let's just kind of make up 5 and do some fictionalized stuff.
Yeah,
we don't really have too many of that for the Cold War, and I think we're getting at a point where we're far enough separated from it that there could be some interest in actually doing Cold War stuff, because mostly when Clancy things are done now, they modernize it for War and Terror or whatever it is we're talking about this week.
I tuned out. I'm going to be honest. I didn't see the film version of
Without Remorse.
No, I did not. I didn't see the film version of that, but I did not see the film version of I'm going blank. The whole plot is unraveling in my head, but I cannot remember.
Sum of All Fears.
Thank you. The Sum of All Fears. The Sum of All Fears was fine the way it was. I know why they changed it, and I think it's a stupid reason, so I didn't bother seeing it.
Yeah, no, it was okay. It was a good action flick, but it wasn't quite Clancy enough for me. And that was sort of the beginning of the let's just make him into an action thing.
Yeah.
And then there was Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit, which Chris Pine, was it? I can always confuse the two. Chris Pine, Chris Pike, whatever it is. And they sort of turned it into something else. It's just an action film. So I'm like, if you really want, I think there's an audience for that Cold War stuff, because we just haven't ever seen any of it since the middle of the Cold War, right? But we've not kind of gone backwards and said, let's really look at it. I think if you started from Without Remorse and worked your way forward throughout the Clancy universe, there's so much material there. You could go on for so many seasons. It's not even funny.
Hell, do this one. Tell your friend to do Red Storm. Everybody's harping on the Russians these days. This could be your way in,
Red Storm Rising would be a great way. It'd have to be a 10-part miniseries, because you can't do that in a movie. I mean, you'd have to do 3 parts or something.
That's like 200 hours of show right there.
It'd be like trying to do the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, it's just so much to it.
It really would.
Yeah, you'd have to do it as a miniseries. It just doesn't work any other way, unless you call Peter Jackson and get him to actually do something like that. But it's not really his bailiwick.
Yeah.
But plus, he did so good with Lord of the Rings. I think at this point he's like, I'm not doing another one of those. No.
Yeah.
Bad. But I think there's an audience for that, and I think it would be interesting, because we're going back into a world where the Russians are enemies again, right? Europe's kind of falling to crap.
And when literally, I remember when I started as I was ending reading Tom Clancy, I remember this hopeful bit of dialogue between 2 Russian generals about how awesome it was going to be because we're allies with the Americans now, and we can make the better world that we always wanted, above Soviet style communism, above, terrified Americans pointing nukes at us. And I was like, well, that's kind of a hopeful place. And now here we are again.
Yeah. So and the one thing that I think is funny is that the United States is there's this old saying in the defense industry. It's like, well, we don't have to worry about that country because they have McDonald's. We've never been attacked by a country that has McDonald's. And Russia closed their last McDonald's in 2022. So I'm like,
yeah.
there
you go.
I don't know, man. We're kind of that story may still hold true.
We actually have a question here from Engine Joe. Did you play any of the Splinter Cell games, Tim?
A couple, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think of what'd you think of them? Engine Joe wants to know.
They're fine. I mean, I played them. I played them again and again and again. So I had fun with them. But I remember I'm an avid gamer who dates back to like when Pac-Man was new. So, whatever was popular that week was usually where I was. So,
right on.
And I'm waiting for the new Doom. Gosh darn. And I don't know if you can see it, but I have my Dragon's Lair t-shirt on today.
I did not see that.
I still can't beat Dragon's Lair. I've been trying.
Nobody can beat Dragon's Lair, Tim. Don't worry about it. You're in good company.
So, yeah. So I think it was great, and I think the fact that those games existed, but now they've kind of died off on the side, and we don't really have too many of those anymore. So, I think there's a chance for a resurgence of some of this stuff, and yeah, I'd love it if Hollywood and the book industry took a shot at another author. But let's face it, that I don't see that happening anytime soon. But let's go with the good ones. And if you want, over on my YouTube channel, I do have a thing I'm building up of videos that are the books in chronological order. And I'm through Hunt for Red October. So there's 4 up there. Red Winter will be up late this week, early next week, whenever I finish it. And then after that is Cardinal the Kremlin, which was a fantastic book, followed by Clear and Present Danger. And I wanted to talk about that one. I forgot about it.
Well, let's talk about Clear and Present Danger.
That is another one I think that could absolutely be its own miniseries today, although you got a great reference movie with Harrison Ford and a great cast, where the CIA actually opened up and kind of declared war on the cartel. If you have not seen that movie, it is a very decent adaptation of the book. It's not perfect because the book's like 600 pages long and it's a movie.
Yeah.
But you get Harrison Ford and again, an all-star cast. But Harrison Ford, when he's pissed off and frustrated, I mean, that's his bread and butter, right? Yeah. This was the height of Harrison Ford in angry mode.
Yes. Angry Harrison Ford in the 90s. What was it? He was Air Force One.
He was Clear and Present Danger,
Patriot Games. Angry Harrison Ford was best. Indignantly
the Fugitive.
Angry.
The Fugitive.
The Fugitive. The Fugitive.
Yeah.
Another great one.
It's a very quotable movie, actually.
An underrated movie. He was angry in the right places regarding Henry.
It was actually a good one. And of course, all the Indiana Jones stuff that came out. And I personally think they should have stopped at Indiana Jones Part 3. It's just me. Because how
what do you
else
mean should have stopped? What are you?
I know.
Yeah, Young Indiana Jones. Yeah, Indiana Jones was okay, but there was nothing after that.
There's nothing. It's kind of like The Godfather. There's only 2. There's only 2.
Yeah.
That abomination of the third one does not exist. It's a problem. There was a portal to another world that opened up, and it just
Daddy
magically.
Oh my God, that movie was so bad.
Yeah, I actually, and I will put this out there for Harrison Ford fans. You lambast me all day you want. Indiana Jones Part 3 was absolutely the best one. It wouldn't have gotten there without the first one. So the first and the third are kind of my go-to movies in that set. The second one I thought was okay. It wasn't great. But the first and the third one are amazing, especially the third one. Yeah. The fourth one we won't discuss. The fifth one I thought was better than a lot of people gave it credit for, because it was sort of indie at the end of his career, and he got to say goodbye to the character. And I get what they were trying to do, but it didn't quite get there. But it's Indiana Jones. You got to disconnect from reality because it's freaking indie, and he does, it's like watching National Treasure and go, that's not realistic. Well, of course not. It's National Treasure.
Oh, somebody mentioned way up in the comments, way early on at the beginning of the show, we were lamenting the fact that Sean Bean dies in every movie. He does not die in National Treasure. He loses, but he doesn't die.
There's a few. Somebody actually did like a thing one time where they actually analyzed it. He only dies in like 60-something% of his movies. and now there's like apparently he puts a clause in there that he's like not allowed to die anymore because he's getting tired of it. So
I don't blame him.
But I guess it gets you out of doing sequels if you don't want to do them. But
that's also very true.
Yeah. So, Zardoz. We do not discuss Zardoz. No, we don't. That was the biggest paycheck movie ever.
Connery in a red felt banana hammock.
Zardoz. No. That ranks up there with the second Highlander movie. I just no.
Yeah, that's just okay. So no one of consequence didn't like what happened to Marcus Brody in the third Indiana Jones movie. They kind of made him a clown. I thought it was great for the scene where angry Harrison Ford, he's telling the Nazis, 3 days if you're lucky. By now he's already got the diary, and he's just like just like tearing the Nazis down, and then cut to him at the train station. I say, does anyone here speak English?
It's like Marcus, he gets lost in his own museum. Come on.
Yeah. I thought it was a cute scene, but I get where you're coming from, but I thought it was a cute scene.
Those movies were just fun. I mean, they weren't meant to be serious. No archaeologist. And if you look at it, and I think Big Bang Theory got this one right. If you look objectively at Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones's presence makes absolutely no difference on the outcome of the movie.
That only matters. Okay. Hear me out. That only matters if the name of the movie was The Lost Ark. That the movie is about Indiana Jones. So yes. The movie takes place because we follow the adventures of Indiana Jones. So I respectfully disagree with you.
Well, the ending would not change for the Nazis. They would still find it and all die. The U.S. would still throw it in a warehouse someplace, but the Indiana Jones
men.
Top men, yeah. And the other thing I love about that is that if you look at all three movies, Indy really doesn't do archaeology. He does basically steal stuff from other people who've already found it.
So for those of you who are curious about this, Indiana Jones is a neutral good 8-level thief. Okay,
that's all he is. He's just a thief.
He's proficient with weapons. He can read scrolls. He can find traps. He can disarm traps. He is a high charisma, high strength 8-level thief. He's not an archaeologist. He is not.
Nope.
He is not the D&D equivalent of a sage.
He is not. And he's a really good thief, but he's a thief who somehow gets paid as a professor. So, yeah, I look at it every time. I'm like, he's not doing any kind of science here. He's like, belongs in a museum. So you're going to steal it from the guy that owns it? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, I think it speaks volumes to how people feel about Temple of Doom that Colleen had one of the broadcast do you know how there are broadcast streaming channels? It still comes over the internet, but you don't get to pick what you watch. It just comes through. She was watching one of those FXXX one. I don't remember, but all day long, maybe it's a holiday weekend, they were just showing Indiana Jones movies on a loop. 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, and 4. They would never show Temple of Doom. I love the Temple of Doom because I love Amrish Puri's completely over the top job as Mola Ram.
Yeah.
I fucking love Mola Ram. Drop them, Dr. Jones. They will be found. You won't. Oh my god.
And that's actually one of the things I like about the fifth one, right? Is that it's like he's climbing something. He's like, oh yeah, well you haven't had to drink the blood of Cully or have this or have that. He's like complaining about all his aches and pains, and he's like, I'm getting old, man. It's like I've had all this stuff happen. So it's like that's one of the things I like about it. Although the fourth one, when he like locked himself in the fridge and survived a nuclear attack, I'm like, okay,
there is no fourth one. There is no fourth one.
I do remember fridges from the 60s, and while I might think some of those things could probably survive a nuclear attack.
Yeah.
I know my grandmother had one that you couldn't hurt. But
we had one. It was a GE, and it had that. It was like the Ford V8 logo on it in the 1970s. Had that big chevron. General Electric. You know the one I'm talking about, right?
I do, and I'm gonna go way off topic here, but the thing I love about those is sort of the Art Deco style. Mm-hmm. And I will someday go take pictures of my kitchen and post it all over the place, but for people to see, because I just redid my kitchen. And for anybody who's curious, yes, I am a guy. Yes, I am single. Yes, I own my own place, and I got to decorate it without help from anyone, which annoys my teenage daughter to no end. So I used whatever I felt like to go and decorate my place. And I'm trying to find it on... Oh, gosh, why are they doing this to me? I went and bought, and this is the small version of it, this thing called Smeg. Have you seen this, Bill?
Yes, I have.
So there's a thing called Smeg Appliances. There's a company called Smeg. And if you ever watch Red Dwarf, you find that even funnier.
Yes.
But I don't know. Okay, I put the little window there. I don't think I can share. There it is. So Smeg Appliances. It's, I went crazy with these guys.
Are you so much of a fan you would call yourself a Smeg head, Tim?
I would call myself a Smeg head.
You call yourself a Smeg head.
I made my kids watch that, so now they're like, "Oh God!" But I have down to the knife set. I have the coffee maker, the blenders.
Did you get a magnetic letter H to stick on it though?
I have ordered a magnetic letter H from Red Dwarf folks. So
I am happy that I was able to contribute a little bit.
I didn't even think about that till you said it. I'm like, oh, I've got to do that now. So well, if you really want to and you've watched Red Dwarf, there is a company out there called Smeg Appliances. I will warn you that I think my toaster was $600, but it's a really nice toaster.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what kind of toaster Tom Clancy had. So I probably something made by Raytheon, I would guess, you know.
So I will make you, I'll give you this one, Bill. I used to work for Raytheon, right?
Okay.
And one of the things I heard a general say one time was, Raytheon, love you guys. You can't possibly buy less for more. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
And I laughed. I'm like, yeah, that's actually true.
All right.
One of the problems of the defense sector.
One of the many. We could probably do a whole show on that. But
yeah.
I think we finally, for those of you who maybe came in late, timey-wimey-limey with your completely incorrect thoughts about Temple of Doom, Tom Clancy was just a, I don't want to say just, as if to deprecate him, but Clancy, right place, right time, right questions, and just the guy that they wanted to kind of promote the whole thing. Do you think that's a fair summation, Tim?
I think that's fair. I think he was getting information, but I think he was getting it from the right places, and I think they gave him what they wanted to give him.
Yep. Yep.
So,
and just think, if he was alive today, he could just go on the World of Tanks forum and get all the classified information.
My guess is he would buy the World of Tanks forum and correct all the details because everybody else got it wrong.
Yeah.
He was just about right before he got divorced. He was actually in the running to buy the Baltimore Orioles, so the dude had cash, right?
I didn't even realize that he had wound up getting divorced, but
yeah, he got divorced and remarried, but yeah, he almost bought the Baltimore Orioles at one point. So
wowzers. Well, all right. Anything else we wanted to cover that we didn't, Tim?
No. I'm just glad. If anybody is curious, I am going to continue on this quest, so just go check out my channel.
Yeah, I will link to Tim's channel in the description. I neglected to do that. Shame on me. But thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for stopping by tonight. I'll be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk about the guac. Tim, I hope you can make it to the online convention, the Great Underground Online Gaming Convention. And
yeah, I didn't make it last year. I might make it this year.
I hope you can. I
want to sit in and listen to. I would have been in one of Doom's games because I think him as a DM would be an interesting experience.
He's a fantastic dude. People line up to like sign the let me in if somebody drops out sheet for Doom's games. He is a fantastic game master. I have done that. I have done that, and if he's letting people listen in, do it. It is like an AD&D radio play. Highly recommend. But we're going to talk about that some tomorrow night. Tim, help yourself to some Hennessy and pistachios in the green room. I'm going to say goodnight to the kids here. So thank you again for being here, Tim.
Oh, no problem. Have a great night, man.
Peace. Alrighty, guys. That was Dr. Timothy Imholt, and we talked about Tom Clancy and espionage and appliances and me being right about Temple of Doom and everything else. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I will be back tomorrow. And again, we're going to talk about the guac. We're going to talk about signing up for the guac. And I'm going to open the floor for D&D questions and all kinds of questions because I love talking to you guys. And then Friday night, we will be back for some grim, gritty post-apocalypse action in Gamma World. So don't you dare miss that, because if you do, I absolutely, unquestionably will sick an owlbear on you. Peace. Good night. Thank you, everyone. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Love you all. See you later.
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere, in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around, some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle, way off course? Naked as a toad, all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me to the show, I don't care if fast or slow.